Let's settle in for our next session. Now, despite what you may think and maybe what you've heard, robots are not going to steal our jobs. Well, not all of them anyway. Frequently, when we hear about the workforce of tomorrow, we hear about centaurs and human machines, kind of hybrids between humans and machines, or at least humans that can work with and interact, collaborate with AI, robots, and of course, data. That's the theme of our next session, Augmenting the Human Capacity and Decision-Making with Data. Please welcome Brian Duffy, President of SAP EMEA North.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here with everybody today in Paris. I love coming to Paris, and I am very passionate about this particular topic that we are going to talk about today, which is around how we are, in fact, augmenting human capability today rather than stealing jobs, taking jobs away from robots, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's been said lots that actually data is today's gold. And I firmly believe that the gold that we have today is actually in our hands, and you all have your phones out, I can see them. That data is, lots of it is actually on your phones in today's world. And we all have an obligation where we actually have to embrace that data and use that data for the benefit of ourselves and for the benefit of our businesses. And data and exponential technologies are today's change makers, and we at SAP see that with our customers day in and day out all across the world. And I want to give you a couple of stats just so we can set the record straight. So first of all, we're collecting more data today around the world than we have been before. We're actually collecting 3.2 zettabytes of data today, and that's going to grow to 40 zettabytes of data within the next 6 years. So a lot of data. And there are lots of concerns around how we're actually going to use that data. Where is that data going to be stored? And we want to make sure that there won't be an intrusion or an irresponsible use of data as well. And I think everybody knows there's been lots of headlines in the press lately. We won't name the companies, et cetera, around how that data has actually been used and how it's been stored. But it's led to lots of headlines, like you can see here behind me, how robots are going to take our jobs, AI is going to destroy more jobs than it's actually going to create. And we've also had the Professor Stephen Hawking, the late great Professor Stephen Hawking, who said that the development of full artificial intelligence is actually potentially going to spell the end of the human race. Some big statement. And all of these fears are creating panic, but I don't think that they should. In fact, we at SAP think that data is a force for good for an individual and for a company, and these exponential technologies are improving consumers' lives, they're improving companies, and today, I hope I'm going to be able to show you how we're actually doing that. So in order to get started, I want to set the record straight, and we're going to deal with a couple of facts. So the first fact is that according to the International Labour Organization, global unemployment is actually falling today. And in France, here in France, unemployment is at the lowest that it has been since 2009. And at the same time, studies are showing that productivity and average wages for normal people are actually increasing at the same time. However, having said that, it is true that between 2000 and 2010, there was a loss of jobs. And in total in the world, apparently we have lost close to 10 million jobs globally. Those jobs were traditional jobs. However, you should rest assured that at the same time, so between 2000 and 2010, we actually created in the world 21 million new jobs. And data and innovation were the growth engines for the creation of many of those 21 million jobs. And I could stay up here for an hour, and I can list off all the jobs that were created during those 10 years. But the reality is that many of the jobs that were created actually didn't exist before. So take, for example, an app developer, a social media manager, a big data analyst, a security specialist. None of these jobs, in fact, existed 10 years ago. And in sticking with facts, I'll tell you that today, 65% of children who are entering primary school today, they're actually going to be working in jobs that don't even exist right now. 65% of children in primary schools will be working in jobs that don't exist today. Personally, I think it's exciting to live in an era where innovation is the currency and where purpose-led outcomes are the driving force for everybody. And I think we all know that when we have a challenge, whether it's a business challenge or a personal challenge, very often we're going to look to see how is technology going to help us solve those particular challenges. And I'm going to give you a very simple, mundane example. And I spend a lot of my time traveling. I spend a lot of my time in the office. I live in London, and I have a lot of meetings. Sometimes I have too many meetings. Like everybody, we have too many meetings. However, I love my job, but at the same time, when we have those meetings, we need to have somebody who's going to be able to capture the action items of those meetings. And when you actually think of that, that's a pretty mundane task that needs to occur. So my team decided, well, why not use technology and see what we could do? So I'm going to take out my phone because my team created an app. And the app is what is listening to the meeting. Listening to the meeting, and then they are capturing what is happening in that meeting. So if I get this right, I'm going to introduce you now to Matt. And Matt captures minutes, actions, themes, and trends that are happening in the meeting, and nobody needs a pen and paper during one of my meetings. So we're going to get started. Okay. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Brian. What can I help you with?
I'm at Vivatech. Can you help capture the discussion for me, please?
Sure. Just press the speak button when you're ready, and I'll take care of meeting notes and actions.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to leave this down, and now we're going to let the app run in the background, and we're going to see by the end of the meeting if Matt's actually done what everybody tells me he does, and he will capture all the actions from the meeting. Now, we created this app because we know the power that technology has, and we know the power that data has. And SAP as a company, we have around 88,000 employees around the world. For those of you who don't know, 77% of the world's transaction revenue is actually touching an SAP system, and 98 of the top global 100 brands are running SAP to support their business as well. Some big stats. And I have the privilege and the honor of running a region in this part of the world, EMEA North, and it's a big business, it's a complex business, yet, even though it's really complex and we do an incredible amount of transactions and volume, with the click of a button, I can access from my phone, from my iPad, from my laptop. If I want, I actually don't have a laptop. If I wanted to, I can access how my business is doing, and I can drill down and see how the people are doing. And all of this is made possible because we have access to data. And this exponential technology, it's not only available to SAP or to big companies, it's actually available to all of us today, whether you're a consumer or you're a small, medium-sized company. And data is, in the world today, addressing lots of problems that we have. For example, how are we going to eliminate bias in the workplace? It's reducing the impact of disease, and at the same time, we're streamlining production as well. So I could sit up here and I can keep going through stand up here, keep going through all the facts, and I could probably bore you to death as well. But rather than doing that, what I'm going to do is I want to share with you lots of stories around how customers of ours and partners of ours are actually using data to change their lives or their businesses. And I'm going to get started with an example. And in 2011, I moved to Japan. And it was my second day in Japan. And during my second day, I had the first experience of my life, which was I experienced my first ever earthquake. And then 2 days later, I experienced my second earthquake. And I am in Tokyo on the 42nd floor, and all of a sudden, the building starts to move. And that earthquake registered 9.1 on the Richter scale. So for those of you who don't know, that's one of the largest earthquakes that has ever been registered. And that building moved a lot, a lot. It registered 9.1 on the Richter scale. It started a tsunami. And unfortunately, 15,000 people lost their lives as a result of that earthquake and tsunami. And that impacted their lives in a great, great way. And in Japan, there are over 127 million people who are susceptible to an earthquake. And in fact, in 2016, there were over 6,000 earthquakes in Japan in total. 6,000 earthquakes in Japan. So if you're living in Japan, you want to make sure that wherever you're going to live, you can live in a really safe building. And I'll be honest, when I was on the 42nd floor of that building, and it was shaking like this, and then it was shaking like this, I was thinking that building is actually going to fall down. That's genuinely what I thought. However, what we are doing to help people stay safe is we're giving them access to data, and data is helping scientists manage the earthquakes and the impact that the earthquakes have. And I'm very proud that we're partnering with an organization called Hakusan in Japan, and we've created a mobile app, and that app is detecting the structural integrity of a building after the earthquake. So the earthquake happens, you want to know, is the building that was in the earthquake zone actually safe, and can I come back into that building? And how are we doing that? We're doing that because we're collecting lots and lots of data, and we are installing over 100,000 seismic monitors on buildings across Japan, and then we are generating 4 terabytes of data from those sensors every single year. This data is then pulled, it is fed into a database, and in real time, individuals can monitor to see if a building is actually safe to live in, which is allowing people to make informed decisions around where they should actually live. For me, I think this is an incredible use of data. It's not removing any of the human capabilities at all. It's simply giving the humans all of the data and augmenting a human being's capability at the same time. And I think in this example, you can see that data is actually invaluable, it's improving lives, and quite honestly, right here, it's saving people's lives in Japan as well, because let's remember, there's 127 million people who are susceptible to an earthquake in Japan. And as I said, I run a business. So we were in Japan, that's one example, and now let's talk about a business example. And there have been lots of business leaders here in Paris this week, as we saw. And one of the top priorities for those business leaders is, how are we going to have a diverse organization, right? And I think President Macron clearly had a theme around having a diverse workplace in a big way as well. And why do we want to have a diverse workplace? Because it's proven that diverse organizations are going to thrive, and we can shape ours to be truly diverse, but how do we actually do that? And the traditional way to do it is to allow for humans to make the decisions. However, there is always an unconscious bias as to how a human is going to make a decision. So we are using technology to help remove that bias from the process. So how are we doing that? And it's actually already happening today within SAP. And I'm fortunate that I work for SAP, a company which has embraced this technology, and we're using data in this way. So take, for example, our SuccessFactors, our HR solution. it's going to flag situations where bias has occurred or where it could occur. So if you think of the performance review cycle or during the recruitment cycle, a manager could be making a decision around a raise to give to one employee, a big raise, and then maybe a smaller raise to another employee. The system that we have is actually going to monitor that and see if an unconscious bias has actually occurred. It's not going to tell the manager what raise to give to the employees. Instead, it's going to leave the final decision to the human, knowing that this is what has been flagged, the data has been pulled, and it's allowing the human to make the final decision. And in an example like this, this is where business is operating beyond bias today, and that's something that many of our customers are utilizing as well. So those are two examples that I shared, and the human experiences and outcomes, they're key drivers of innovation based on data. But one of the industries which has embraced technologies in a big way, and always has, is actually the healthcare industry. And here in France, we have the Gustave Roussy Institute, and they're one of the largest cancer centers in Europe. They have top patient outcomes, and they also have a great research laboratory as well. And Gustave Roussy, they are using data to develop more precise treatment for individual patients, because two patients can have the exact same type of cancer, but by crunching the data, and they have a lot of data on this now, they can decide the best treatment for an individual patient, because no two patients are the exact same. And this is saving the doctors at Gustave Roussy a huge amount of time, and it's allowing them to focus on the best patient outcomes. And in this scenario, they can only do that because they are collecting all of the data on those particular patients, and data in this scenario is the game changer. And staying with the healthcare industry, I want to share with you a story which I think is amazing, and it's happening in India, and it's happening right now. And I'll tell you this. This idea started with one individual employee at SAP whose family member was sick and had cancer, and they wanted to do something about it. And in India, we're collaborating with a great non-governmental organization called RNCF, and they're focused on cancer research. And unfortunately, in India, the survival rates of cancer were lower in India than in the Western world. And the reason for that was because all of the data that we have around the world regarding cancer, the majority of it is coming from white, Caucasian individuals. And because of that, there's an insufficient data on Indian patients. And this means that Indian patients were actually receiving treatment which was more suitable for Caucasian patients. And unfortunately, this meant that they received treatments that weren't right for them, resulted in an incorrect dosage of medication very often, and finally resulted in higher toxicity levels in that particular patient, which is not a result that the patient or the doctor obviously wants. So we worked with RNCF, and we created an app. And this app allows the doctors to easily collect data on a particular patient. So the doctor, if they are in Mumbai, if they are in Bangalore, if they are in a town, if they are in a village, if they are in a mobile medical facility, that doctor can still collect data on those patients. And because we made a simple app available to those doctors, today we have collected over 1 million profiles on individuals in India. And based on this data, doctors can now decide what is the right treatment for a patient in India by looking at the data that they have on Indian patients already, and not only looking at the data that they have on Caucasian patients. So in both of these healthcare examples, and we might get very nervous when we think of data and healthcare and personal, we can actually see that in these scenarios, we are helping doctors to focus on that which is truly important. We are augmenting the doctor's ability to actually save lives in this scenario. Data in both of those scenarios is actually helping save lives, which I think is great, and all of us do. And you may think that we can only use data to actually help save human beings' lives, but the good news is that we can actually, and we are, helping to save the lives of elephants. And I want to share with you a video, which you might think, how are we doing this regarding elephants? I want to share with you a video how we are using data to address the conflict between humans and elephants in Africa. So let's take a look at this.
Anybody who's been exposed to an elephant at some level will feel that impact. So I'm not sure that it can leave you untouched. It's an almost spiritual experience.
Poaching occurs all over South Africa. It's a daily event.
I wanted desperately to do something about the plight of elephants in the wild and rhinos being killed in the wild.
We wanted to make a difference. So we used some funds from our for-profit business, funded our non-profit business, and started up. And we launched this initiative called Elephant, Rhinos and People, ERP.
Rural communities surrounding elephants and rhinos in the wild are poverty-stricken for the most part, and they don't have choices. So resorting to poaching as a means of putting food on the table, these are not trophy hunters. These are people who are acting in the interests of survival, and I can understand that.
A dead rhino is worth way more than a live one. The average price of a rhino horn is about $80,000 per kilogram that they can fetch on the black market. If this continues at this rate, rhinos will be extinct in less than a decade.
I felt that we can and must do something about this. If you provide people with economic alternatives to the brutal act of poaching, they will stay away from that activity.
What we're doing is really alleviating poverty and putting long-term programs in place and educating people, and to a certain extent make them dependent on conserving the wildlife.
We're now using SAP technology itself as an enabler in the protection of elephants and rhinos in the wild through poverty alleviation.
So the way we leverage SAP Leonardo right now is that we have this IoT framework with the GPS devices.
We're using physical collars on elephants, using global positioning, satellite technology, where those positions are tracked on an ongoing basis. That information is coming back down into ultimately a HANA database.
This data is then uploaded to the cloud, and we have a SAP cloud platform for that, and we can exactly see where they are and follow them. I have it in my pocket right now and can show you exactly where elephants are at midnight in South Africa. The ERP Air Force is our air surveillance program where we're leveraging drones to have eye in the sky and look out for elephants and rhinos, and we track their whole positioning of how they move throughout the reserve. We have a number of documented cases, 20 plus, where we actually find people with the drone program that has led to some arrest, and we've used some of that footage for evidence. With SAP's technology, we haven't had a poaching incident. There's no question that SAP's technology and the way we're using it saves elephants' lives on a daily basis. And there's a wealth of things that we'd still like to do and add on to SAP Leonardo in this IoT framework. You can just think of motion sensors and start determining moving patterns of elephants and using predictive analytics of where they could go next and take some preventative actions to do that.
The real uptick, I think, though, for the likes of SAP and SAP's clients and partner ecosystem, there are lessons to be learned that could be applied potentially into other industries that we're not even aware of right now.
Why do you do what you do, and why do you live your life? And I think a big part of it is to leave this a better place than we found it.
So as you can see in that example, this solution, we're collecting a lot of data and we're actually augmenting the human capability to allow them to better manage, monitor these endangered wildlife animals. And I think the point with all of these stories, hopefully I've made it without having to stress it too much, is that data in each and every one of these scenarios, from Japan to India, here in Gustave Roussy in France, also in the scenario with the elephants, data is a driver for goodness and insight, and it's leading to better outcomes as well. But at the outset, when we started, I mentioned that data should be embraced, and we shouldn't actually be fearful of that data at the same time. And if we use data responsibly, and I'll stress, if we use data responsibly, we're augmenting the capabilities of our minds and freeing up time for us also to work on other strategic topics, because very often data is automating things whereby we don't need to be doing those mundane tasks. And as a result, when businesses specifically do this, they can create purpose-driven businesses that positively influence, impact, and supercharge the lives of individuals and also the companies that these individuals work in, not only for ourselves, but also for the future generations to come. And exponential technologies, they're a game changer for all of us in today's world. And in wrapping up and in speaking about game changers, I would say, I want to share with you that SAP asked its 88,000 employees how they would use technology to impact the lives of individuals. And we didn't say to impact 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 100,000 people. Instead, we said, how would you use technology to make a positive impact on over 1 billion lives across the world? And in under 8 weeks, teams from across the world submitted lots and lots of ideas around how they would use technology to impact the lives of individuals. And we would address topics like, how are we going to drive equity in the workplace? How are we going to keep our seas clean? How are we going to keep the earth clean? And how are we going to support genome matching research? And what is great and what is awesome is that SAP, we're going to support each and every one of those ideas, because we know that together it's possible to use technology to actually improve the lives of individuals around the world. And I know we're getting tight on time, so I want to make sure that I can go back to our friend Matt when we started. And if we pull up the app, we can see that Matt has captured what I've been talking about on the left-hand side, and I will be able to drill into that in further detail to see if he's captured all of the themes that we hit on and the keywords. He's identified the questions which have been asked, and we can see them at the bottom left. He's also suggested some other articles based on what I've been talking about that probably I should go read. And all of this has been done when we've been sitting here talking, and instead nobody's been capturing any items and nobody has been researching anything online. It's because Matt and the data which he has access to makes this available to him. And this is an example of how data and AI are actually augmenting human capabilities, and they are allowing us to focus on the more strategic topics as well. So in conclusion, what I would say is, I hope that for everybody here, the power of data is abundantly clear. Number one, it is creating jobs, it is improving lives, and as I showed you, it's actually saving lives as well. It is allowing individuals and companies to accelerate social, accelerate environmental, and also to bring about great economic change for companies as well. Big data technology, one, is here to stay. It's actually making us more human. Data, we can crunch lots of numbers. However, it's only humans that can actually dream what we can do with that data, and the future of the world and what we do with that data is actually in our own hands, our very human hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. As we heard, we could all embrace data for good, and it will augment our capacities. It can also help us to move faster in this stage. There's an entrance at your right, and you can exit from the left, which should help you. So come on in, have a seat, and get comfortable. Because even with data, humans will need to rest. They will need comfortable places where they can